Thank you very much. The good, the bad, and the ugly are evolving at an extraordinary pace. And we hear about what we should be doing to ensure security modernization. But what can we do now in the short term is the real question. And we want to investigate this deeply and understand what we can do operationally and infrastructure-wise to protect our employees, our constituents, brand, and especially when we have such limited resources and budgets. I'll begin with the premise that if information exists, it's accessible. Secondly, most executives believe that beyond their people, their information is an organization's most valued asset. So the question that I have here is, how do you valorize the information that you have? And I'd like to start with you, Manish.
Thanks, Richard. Well, I think most organizations, what they have to do is they have to, with limited budget, form a priority. And that prioritization begins with collaboration with the city clerk's office, with business owners and data custodians that can help identify data based on classification. And based on how that's classified, then you look at the security, the infrastructure, and everything around that that's supporting the safekeeping of that data. So the first step really is to have that discussion and identify what is the key data to the organization and where is it being housed and how do we secure that?
Thank you very much. Brent, do you have anything to add?
Yes. I think one of our strongest assets we have in our organization is our people. If you talk to the right people in our organization, they'll be able to tell you how much the information we're securing is worth. They may not be able to quantify the exact dollar value for the information related to the assets, but they can help us get to the answer. It's critical that the information security team spend more time with our business leaders to understand the questions such as, how long would it take to recreate all of our engineering drawings? Or more simple questions such as, how much lost productivity would we have if the ERP system was unavailable for a week? Using this information, we can start to tell a story about how critical an asset is and what it's worth from a service delivery perspective.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, at the end of 2022, there was a lot of talk around cyber insurance. In fact, the Zurich CEO, Mario Greco, said that cyber attacks will become uninsurable. And earlier last year, Lloyd's of London came out and said that they were not going to be able to handle insurance for organizations that were attacked by states. So if the cyber attack came from China or from some other country, that it probably would not be insurable. And we're seeing this rise in cybersecurity going from $3 trillion in 2015, according to the World Economic Forum, to $10.5 trillion by 2025. So what measures have you taken about cyber insurance, and do you see this changing soon? And Roland, I'd like you to address that, please.
Yeah, certainly we see a lot of changes in terms of the cyber insurance industry. So for our organization, we kind of taking this advantage to really make every department aware of the importance of cybersecurity practices. Right? So as the insurance carrier, they raise the bar in terms of what they're asking for, and that become a platform for us to really work with different growth business unit and really pay attention of improving on your cybersecurity practices, like those controls, and become a platform to make sure that everyone follow the policy, the direction and practices to become more mature over time.
Kush, do you have any comments on this? Because we see this changing, this dynamic of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think when we look at insurance and municipalities specifically, we see that many municipalities going forward will not qualify for cyber insurance based on the heightened controls that insurance companies are asking for. In addition to that, even if they do qualify, there are many new caveats like the act of war, which has kind of been expanded. There are several private sector cases that certain companies have received insurance and then are taking their insurance companies to court because they're not paying out and defining it as the act of war where it's a ransomware group, right? So they're associating those ransomware groups to a state actor. And this is kind of where the gray area is. So what we see in terms of a trend outside of some of the larger municipalities, I think, they'll have to look inward to creating kind of self-insurance, grouping together and creating those specific, unique let's say, apparatuses where they can come together as a municipality and self-fund themselves.
And Manish, are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I think similar. I mean, I think what organizations have to understand is that insurance is really not a control. It's not a cyber control. It's part of your remediation. It's part of the recovery. So what this is driving now is how best can we improve and mature our security posture.
Excellent. Now, we talked about the fact that we believe that information is a huge value to us, yet we also find that 80% of that information is held in things like unstructured documents in various systems, much of it containerized in things like Microsoft 365 or PDF documents. And this unstructured content is either the primary information source or the part of a broader collection of information that invariably many in the organization may access, and much of which is duplicated in multiple areas of the organization. So with that, and I'd like to go back to you, Brent, with regards to your people, and how do you assess the risk related to the information within your organization?
So regularly interacting with our business leaders and the operational teams will help us not only understand what the organization's most critical assets are, but where they reside, which is critical. This changes over time, so it's important that we continue to revisit the discussion. Once we have a clear understanding of where our critical assets are, we can focus on assessing the risk more comprehensively with tools like vulnerability assessments, compliance assessments, controls audits, and just cybersecurity industry data from reputable sources.
I'm just wondering if we could expand on this, Kush, to talk about how you achieve that balance with your people and your information.
It's a difficult challenge to look at or remediate. I think looking at those critical assets, in our survey that we did at MISA Ontario, our constituents mentioned that 92% of them feel that they should focus on critical infrastructure, so water systems, transportation, solid waste, elections, etc., as opposed to traditional IT. And so if we take that guidance that we received from our membership, we could try to strike a balance there. Because what you don't want is the water system to be breached, right? If Microsoft Office 365 and your documents go down, and maybe you can't process some financial statements, that can be fixed or dealt with manually. But if your water system goes down, there's life safety issues to that. So if we can try to balance the resources that we have as municipalities and focus on the critical infrastructure components, i.e. the systems and the data sitting in those systems first, I think that would be a good start.
Thank you for that. Roland, you're in a little bit of a different environment and you've got a very broad constituency right in the institution. So how do you achieve that balance?
Yeah, I think we achieve the balance by doing the threat risk security, threat risk assessment process. So what the threat risk assessment giving us is a very quick scan through to identify the initiative, whether or not the proposed solution justify to collect all those information they want to collect, and give a clarification in terms of the criticality of what they processing. And based on that information, you can drive a balance in terms of how much security you should build along with it, or maybe have a streamlined process to acquire those systems on board. So that's how we try to balance. And on top of that, we also work closely with the privacy office to make sure that all those information collected are deemed to be necessary.
Thank you for that. So Manish, of the information stored within your organization, how do you know where all the personally identifiable information may be held and by whom?
Right, and that's a fairly big task, which requires a lot of collaboration between us and your data custodian or the city clerk's office, and really the information owners and the business owners. But I think a key way to mitigate that risk is constant cyber awareness training for your staff. It's hard to control that, but if we give our people and our resources the right cyber awareness and the right tools on how to safeguard it, I think that puts all of us in a better position.
Brett, I'd like to build on that actually, because when looking at cybersecurity and where the low-hanging fruit is to protect your organization and mitigate as much risk as possible, understanding the information you have and where it is is a fundamental first step. And how are you informed on information assets and where those assets may include sensitive information in your organization?
Key theme that I'm always looking at is spending some more time working directly with the employees from all areas of the organization, right from the senior leadership team all the way to the frontline workers group. Also, working with the IT business systems analysts and the clerks department, also the records management teams will help you to better understand the lesser known locations of where the PII is stored. These people are experts in collaborating with different units of the organization, and they know where all of the data is kept officially and unofficially. So not just where it's supposed to be stored, but all the temporary or the alternate locations. So sometimes you'll find people storing PII somewhere just because it's convenient and helps them get from point A to point B faster. So the more that we understand the use cases for these temporary or alternate locations, easier it is to work with the business units to improve on the security posture.
So we all agree that starting with knowing what information is stored within the organization is really important, and protecting personally identifiable information and payment card industry, things like credit cards, et cetera, help to mitigate a large percentage of potential risk. But we're seeing that the governance over this is getting more and more broad, and we're seeing this more because the GDPR, for example, in Europe was put in effect in 2018, and their fines have gone from 1.3 billion in 2021 to 1.581 billion last year. And we see the new California Privacy Rights Act coming on board. We see Canada now with Bill C-11, also known as the Digital Charter Implementation Act of 2020, or some call it CCPA. And this is going to change even PIPEDA. There's going to be changes to PIPEDA affecting it. So Canadians are going to be exposed to a new level of protection legislation for privacy. So as we prepare for that, and I'm going to turn to you first, Roland, is what is your baseline for compliance? Do you look to the GDPR or the CPRA, or do you rely solely on local or national regulations such as PIPEDA? And why have you taken this approach?
Well, I think first of all, it's about the regulation in terms of what are required to comply. First and foremost is the PCI industry. I think that is the regulation like all business need to comply with. Without compliancy, there's some financial implication to organization. So we adopt a program, and fortunately, we were able to pretty well help all those business units to work with third-party service provider in a point that the organization will not hold any credit card information on site. Regardless how you do things, including financial accounting or anyone, no one will touch the credit card number. So by that program, we worked a couple of years, we successfully to outsource those services from a third-party payment provider who are certified to do those kind of work. So I think we handle that very rigidly every year and through the PCI audit, and we comply on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. And Kush, do you have a follow-on with that? Because with these small municipalities, what kind of guidance can we give them for a baseline for compliance?
So from a cyber perspective, I mean, generally it's NIST, and that is what kind of the majority of municipalities, the provincial Ontario governments are using, private sector across the board. From a privacy perspective, it's PIPEDA, obviously, in Canada. So, we have to look at those specific requirements. We'll see in the upcoming years, there is the refresh to the privacy legislation in Canada coming. There's a new tabled legislation for cybersecurity in Canada. That'll probably take a couple of years to weave through the system. But the general recommendation is to look at NIST from a cyber perspective. And there's many controls in NIST. So you really have to focus, I would say, if you're a smaller municipality, on the top 10 controls and work through them one by one. If you can do shared services and combine the effort in terms of putting in those controls remediation with, your county or other municipalities, that is definitely the trend that we are seeing.
That's economies of scale. Welcome. Manish, as we modernize, well, that really means we're implementing new things as well. And migrating to a new system requires a review of the data to be migrated and a risk analysis of the information to be migrated. How do you prepare for migration from one system to another? And do you interrogate the information for business or cultural value? And a follow-on question to that is, how do you avoid the lift and shift approach to migration?
Well, I think with that migration, I'm going to maybe step back a bit. There is a discovery/design phase. And what you have to make sure you do is, where is that endpoint you want to get to? The whole point of modernization is to hit those pain points that you had with legacy systems, whether it be excessive access or lack of transparency or not enough controls in place. You want to make sure those are put into your design, so you're not just taking what you had before and shifting it into another tool, but dealing with the same problems after the fact. So what you want to do is improve and get to the point where you're managing risk and being transparent and basing access when we get to the application layer on least privilege.
Brent, I'd like to go to you and say, how do you work through these issues, and how do you have some guidance for our audience on best practices with this?
I think having a lot of patience and the right people dedicated to following all the proper processes and procedures is critical. Every single IT implementation or project is different. And if you stick to the core foundations of all your processes and procedures, it makes things a lot easier. New issues arrive, they need to be dealt with as soon as possible. It's usually easier to handle the issues when you're in the middle of a project rather than, in the middle of implementation.
So as a final question, what tips can you share for improving employee collaboration around security? And I'd like to start with you, Roland.
So I think the collaboration coming is to educating with the end user about what it means by you transforming the system either to the cloud or to the SaaS, and what role, what new function you've been taking on yourself by doing such, and what legal contract we should be in place to make sure that what the trust we have in our vendor are really holding water at the end of the day. So those are things, the discussion, meeting, understanding, and collaboration to make it work.
Excellent. And Kush, last word goes to you. What tips can you share for improving employee collaboration and security?
Yeah, so stop thinking about yourself as a technical function and, we're clicking buttons and doing configuration all day long. Now, that is part of our role, but is not the only part of our role. And we need to translate and communicate better to the leadership that we are a business function. It is a critical business function within the organization, right? We're doing all the modernization, digitization. We're securing all the new, cloud applications, for example, or anything that's coming in. And that's critical for the services that are going to the citizens to be valuable so that they don't get hacked, that they meet the requirements of those users and they can be accessible by those users. And that is the focus that, that we should consider going forward as municipalities, right? Specifically the IT and cybersecurity functions.
Excellent. So I really want to thank you all for your time today. And this was a wonderful discussion. And I'm sure people are going to take a lot away from this in a positive vein, and look forward to greater modernization within our municipal governments and within our institutions. Thank you very much.